Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, Ewan from WhatCulture.com. Today, joined by Josh Brown.
Hello.
And today we're going to talk to you about a pretty interesting development that's emerged in the state of film copyright and franchising. Now I know, you're thinking, copyright? Law? That sounds really boring, but that's where you're wrong, friends. It's actually really, really interesting because all our favourite franchises from the 80s and 90s that keep on making miraculous comebacks. I say miraculous comebacks, I mean they keep on getting the Frankenstein's monster and going, clip!
Yeah, and then
like
money pops out the chest.
Exactly,
yeah.
And that's been happening a long time for the Terminator franchise, and that's the thing that's really kickstarted this report from the Hollywood Reporter by Eric Gardner, and it's really, really interesting because apparently the film's original writer of the first Terminator, Gale Ann Hurd, has moved to terminate a
That's brilliant. That's good.
There we go.
I think you've done that.
Has moved to terminate a copyright grant made 35 years ago, and the Terminator rights themselves are really, really confusing because they were originally with Skydance Media, who the people who own it currently, they acquired the film rights from Megan Ellison, who is the sister of the person who owns Skydance, who bought them for $20 million in 2011 at an auction, and that means that they could now lose the rights to Gale Ann Hurd.
Yeah, right. The Terminator franchise rights have haunted me for years now because they keep trying to make brand new franchises. We were going to get one after Terminator Salvation, that didn't work. Then we got Terminator Genesis, that didn't work. And now Dark Fate is about to come out and hit theaters. And James Cameron, who obviously, made the original two movies, has been talking about how he's back in, how he wants to help produce these new films and kind of take back his legacy. But now all of that might be sort of in disarray once more. The Terminator franchise just can't catch a break, and maybe if it made better movies, it might have been able to. But everyone seems to be fighting over these rights, Ewan, and yet there hasn't really been a really successful sequel in a long time.
That's the interesting, and I think that's kind of the reason why these authors are moving back to reclaim. So apparently under this new, if the termination notice were to actually go through, Hurd would actually have a 50-50 split with James Cameron over the future Terminator rights, and if Skydance were ever to want to make another Terminator film, they'd have to renegotiate with those two. But this is apparently not an exception, according to the Hollywood. This is a sign of a preview to come, because apparently in the late 1970s, Congress amended the law that allowed authors to grab back rights from studios after waiting a few decades. Until now, the termination provision has largely been exploited by musicians, not screenwriters, as per the Hollywood Reporter, but records show a flurry of termination notices in the past year. Under law, they can come at 35 years after publication, which threatens to unsettle who owns the ability to make sequels and reboots of iconic films from the mid to late 1980s. Now, some of the franchises that the Hollywood Reporter mentioned in this list include Who Framed Roger Rabbit, because
tragedy.
Has there ever been someone trying to make a Who Framed Roger Rabbit sequel?
There was multiple attempts. We've actually done some videos on the wacky ideas that were going to be made. I think at one point there was one set in kind of Nazi Germany. It was mad. It was never made, but yeah, they have been trying to make this movie for a while. But now I guess maybe not.
Beetlejuice is another one. Die Hard is another. Predator and Nightmare on Elm Street. Obviously, all the franchises that keep coming back. And there's also something to do with the Friday the 13th has an ongoing dispute with the original writer for that film because the producers say that they worked on a work for hire contract, which is a big thing that we have in comics, where if you write something for a company, you effectively forfeit ownership of that property to that company, which is a really, really dodgy law.
Interesting though, pretty much every single franchise you just mentioned there that is threatened to be taken back all have either sequels or extensions of those franchises planned. We know Disney announced that they had plans for Die Hard going forward. Nightmare on Elm Street is constantly in a state of flux. Will they reboot it again? Will they make another one? Beetlejuice 2 has obviously been in development for so long. These are kind of movies that have had difficult gestating, processes, and now just seem to be on the precipice of being made, and this feels like another roadblock that's sort of like going to come in and take them back. But maybe it is a good thing that the rights revert, because for a lot of these franchises, considering Predator had a new sequel last year that no one really liked, they've just kind of been languishing in sort of middling mid-tier movies and mid-tier continuations that have not really done the brand justice, and they're just sort of chugging along on name recognition alone.
That's a really interesting thing as well, because apparently when these authors are introducing the termination notice, the films basically have a 2-year ultimatum whether to make anything with the license that they currently own, or it goes back to the creators anyway, which is what we saw apparently with Pet Sematary. Apparently that was only made because Stephen King issued a notice to Paramount saying, look, I want these rights back, and they were like, okay, we'll do it. We'll do it. Well, we thought that was them capitalizing on it, but it actually turns out that was more of a reactionary move towards what King wanted to do with the IP. And it's really interesting because in the same report, They had an interview with entertainment attorney Larry Zerner, which is a great name. He says, since the author has to give at least 2 years notice of the termination, that gives the studios 2 years notice that it's use it or lose it. Even if Paramount was on the fence about a remake of a given film, once the termination went into effect, it would be out of their hands or they would have to pay a much larger fee to obviously renegotiate.
Yes. Now, that sounds potentially good. It might sound like we're going to get a bunch of, new movies based on iconic brands, but I have seen firsthand what studios can do and the crap they can push out when they're on the verge of losing rights to a franchise, and it has never really turned out well. So in the long run, oh god, you just keep mentioning them.
It's a bad cough. It's a bad illness.
Honestly, Hellraiser, because that was one of the worst. That was just absolutely terrible. But yeah, even though they might, scramble and push a movie out, it's not going to be beneficial for the brand in the long run because it's ostensibly just being created to, keep the rights, which is not how movies should be made.
Exactly, and it's frustrating. You mentioned Predator earlier on as well, and that's an interesting one for me because obviously you had Shane Black coming to do that, but there was talk of the being behind the scenes like trouble with the studio, and I do wonder whether authors retaining ownership of the copyright isn't just royalties of the past films themselves, but I think it's interesting in the sense of how they decide to use those licenses going forward. Are they going to make sure that these franchises are getting the best deal with certain studios, or are they just going to basically say, no, this is the idea, it's done and dusted now, let's come back to it at a later date perhaps, or just cryogenically freeze it for a while? I don't know, it's interesting. I think it definitely means that the cycle you mentioned there is very worrying with the whole, if they issue the termination notice, that gives them the 2-year period to make something, which is, if they do make something, it's going to be very, very rushed, and that's the big business decision these studios now have to weigh up, is whether they actually keep the film and make something a very short notice, and whether they can make anything good out of it, or whether they just call it a day and realize, look, even if it could make potential loads of money, it's not going to be a solid product.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, like I said, I keep going back to it, if you look at the franchise that I mentioned, especially when it comes to sort of Die Hard and Nightmare on Elm Street, what made those original IPs so special in the first place have kind of, in my eyes, long been lost. The Nightmare on Elm Street remake was a complete disaster in my eyes.
The Rorschach is Nightmare on Elm Street.
Bloody
Mr. Freddy Krueger himself.
Bloody hell. Die Hard 5, Ewan. Can you remember Die Hard 5? Can you remember how bad that was? Do we really want another sort of, do we want... I'm losing my mind. Do we want Die Hard Year 1? Because that was in development.
Oh my god, it is in
development. That was in
development.
That's what we might have got if the rights won't revert back. We might end up with Die Hard, an origin story, Year 1. Do we want
the whole point of John McClane is that he's an ordinary guy caught up in an extraordinary situation? That makes no sense.
I'm losing my mind. Should we end on something quite nice?
Yes.
Because obviously Sony and Marvel made up late last week. Spider-Man is back in the MCU for at least Spider-Man 3 and an untitled Marvel movie, a mystery Marvel movie.
I think it's going to be Secret Wars.
I was thinking that as well.
There we go. Great minds.
There was a report by The Hollywood Reporter earlier today that has kind of made Tom Holland the hero in this situation. Apparently, it was Tom Holland's last-minute tinkering, phoning up the chairman of Sony and Bob Iger of Disney fame, being just essentially saying, please get back together, because he was kind of the child caught in this divorce and he wanted them to make up so he could be in more movies and, please the fans. And according to The Hollywood Reporter, the actor met with Bob Iger and Sony's Tom Rothman a bunch of times and tried to convince them to make amends. Apparently, he convinced Rothman first by, and this is interesting, leveraging his kind of clout, as The Hollywood Reporter put it, on the Uncharted movie to convince him to kind of make amends.
Uncharted has big pull.
Uncharted has big pull, apparently. I don't really believe this one bit, but I like the fact that, Holland is being presented as kind of, the synergy between two warring studios.
The hilarious thing about this, and it's weird that I can't think of an exact movie example to call this rare. I just imagine Tom Holland, Sony and Marvel have just broken up. They really want to get back together, so Tom Holland phones up Marvel being like, oh, Sony wants to meet up back with you, mate. Yeah, they've put you a reservation at this table. It's going to be great. And then meanwhile, he phones Sony. He's like, hey, Marvel wants to get back with you, mate. They want to talk to you. Like, the table's here. And then they come back, and then Tom Holland's in the middle, and then the Sony and Marvel walk in, and then Tom Holland's like, and then Sony's just there like.
In my eyes, that's exactly how it went down. Exactly. But it's still an interesting little thing, because even if it might be manufactured PR or anything like that, I feel like Tom Holland really does have an affection for this version of Spider-Man and both Marvel and Sony, and it's always sort of so cool to see him interacting with the fans. I love Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, okay, but I couldn't imagine Tobey Maguire being the poster child for two big studios coming back back together. Some of Tobey Maguire's behaviour on those first Spider-Man movies was not great, and it's nice to have someone as wholesome and as kind of, he's just very likeable and he's very easy to get behind because he has a lot of, the aspects you'd want to see in Peter Parker, and I think that sort of transfers over into Tom Holland as an actor and a person. So I like the fact that he's getting credit for this, even though the main factor was almost definitely
probably some PR web spin.
Oh, being spun.
There we go. Yeah, please let us know what you thought of those stories down in the comments below. What do you think of these film franchises potentially reverting back to their authors? It's really interesting. I have no idea how Terminator, Dark Fate 2, 5 billion will probably go if they actually do it. Maybe they'll go back to Genesis. Maybe they'll do a big crossover with all the different reboots.
Why do you want
into the Terminator verse?
Why do you want to do this?
I keep going. I can't stop. Anyway, moving on to the next story. Please let us know what you think of the Spider-Man one down in the comments below as well. And make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and head back on over to whatculture.com, where you can find more news, lists, and articles like this every day. You can follow me on Twitter at Ewan Ruins. Things you can follow Josh on Twitter at
Josh Broom with 2 R's.
We'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.